The Great Chamber of the Galactic Assembly was the largest building ever created by any species in the known universe. It stretched across 3 kilometers of space, built from crystals that had been grown over 10,000 years. The ceiling showed the real-time positions of every star and planet where intelligent life existed. Millions of tiny lights moved slowly across the dome, each one representing a world that had sent representatives to this place. Ambassador. Catherine Cole stood at the entrance and took a deep breath. She had been doing this job for 8 years now, but the size of this place still made her feel small. That was probably the point, she thought. Everything about the assembly was designed to remind younger species of their place in the universe. She walked down the long pathway toward the central podium, passing row after row of alien beings. The Velthari sat in their section, their insect-like bodies, clicking and buzzing as they communicated through their hive mind. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. The Corinthax were there too, beings made of living crystal that glowed with inner light. They claimed to remember when the first stars were born, though Catherine suspected this was exaggeration. 412 species had seats in this chamber. Humanity had joined 40 years ago, after their first ships had reached distant stars and made contact with the wider galaxy. In all that time, humans had never won a single major vote in the assembly. They were too young, too few, too unimportant. Today, Catherine was trying to change that. Or at least, she was trying to save 18 million of her people from losing their homes. The matter was simple enough on the surface. Human colony ships had traveled to 3 worlds in a region called the Outer Reach. These worlds had been empty, with no signs of life or civilization anywhere on them. Human families had spent 30 years turning these dead rocks into living worlds. They had built cities and farms and schools. Children had been born there who had never seen Earth. Now the Dreshen hegemony was claiming those worlds belonged to them. The Dreshen were a reptilian species with scales the color of dried blood. They had filed papers with the assembly showing that 50,000 years ago, their ancestors had planted flags on those worlds and declared them Dreshen territory. It did not matter that no Dreshen had visited those worlds since then. It did not matter that the flags had turned to dust thousands of years before humans even existed. What mattered was that the Dreshen claim was older. Catherine reached the podium and activated the holographic display. She had spent 6 months preparing her case. She had photographs of human cities, documents showing every improvement humans had made, testimony from the millions of people who called those worlds home. She began to speak, explaining the situation clearly and carefully. She showed images of children playing in parks that their grandparents had built. She presented evidence that the Dreshen had abandoned these worlds and never intended to return. She made every argument she could think of, putting all her skill and passion into the words. High Arbiter Vazal cut her off after only 10 minutes. Vazal was a Corinthax, one of the crystal beings who had led the assembly for longer than human civilization had existed. His body pulsed with blue light as he raised one crystalline arm for silence. The assembly recognizes the claims of the Dreshen hegemony, he announced. His voice came through translation devices all around the chamber, turning alien sounds into words Catherine could understand. Human colonists will leave the disputed territories within 1 standard rotation. This matter is concluded. Catherine felt the words hit her like a physical blow. 1 standard rotation was about 14 Earth months. 18 million people would have to abandon everything they had built and find somewhere else to live. High Arbiter, she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. I ask for the chance to present our full evidence. The Dreshen have not set foot on these worlds in recorded history. Our people have lived there for 3 generations. Surely this deserves more consideration than 10 minutes. The assembly does not need more evidence, Wazal replied. The Dreshen claim is older than your species. Age of claim is the highest law. This has always been the way. Catherine looked around the chamber, searching for any sign of support. The Velthari clicked their approval of the decision. The gaseous Nethril swirled in patterns that meant they did not care either way. Even the Tamori, who had sometimes been kind to human representatives, stayed silent. No one would speak for humanity. No one ever did. I understand, Wythern said quietly. She gathered her documents and walked back to the small section where the human delegation sat. Her aide, A young man named Daniel Perry was waiting for her. His face was red with anger he was trying to hide. "They did not even let you finish," he whispered. 6 months of work, 18 million people. "And they gave you 10 minutes. Catherine said nothing. She'd learned that showing anger here only made things worse. Humans were supposed to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. They were supposed to be grateful that the assembly allowed them to exist at all. As she sat down, she noticed the Dreshen ambassador watching her from across the chamber. His name was Sethrock, and his reptilian face was twisted into an expression she had learned to recognize across many different species: contempt. Complete and total contempt. He was not looking at her arguments or her evidence. He was looking at her. At humanity, at the very idea that such a young and small species might dare to ask for fair treatment. Catherine filed this observation away in her memory and began writing her report to Earth. The colonies would be evacuated. 18 million people would become refugees, forced to start over somewhere else. Some would lose everything they had worked for their entire lives. Some elderly people would not survive the stress of relocation, and the galaxy would continue to spin, completely indifferent to human suffering. This was, after all, the way things had always been done. The older species made the rules. The younger species followed them. Humanity had been spacefaring for only 300 years. By the standards of the assembly, they were infants who should be happy. They were allowed to sit in the room at all. Catherine sent her report and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the children on those colony worlds, the ones who would have to leave the only homes they had ever known. She thought about the farmers who had spent decades making alien soil produce Earth crops. She thought about all the dreams that would die when the evacuation ships arrived, and she thought about Sethrak's contemptuous face. In the silence of 412 species, who had watched her people be cast out and felt nothing at all, something changed in Catherine Cole that day. A small seed of something dark and cold took root in her heart. She did not have a name for it yet. She only knew that she was tired of being patient, tired of being reasonable, tired of watching her people suffer while the galaxy looked on with indifference. 40 years of membership in the U.S. Galactic Assembly. 40 years of following the rules and respecting traditions and hoping that things would get better. And what did humanity have to show for it? Nothing but pain and loss and the contempt of beings who thought themselves superior. The seed in her heart would grow over the coming years. It would spread through the human government, through the military, through the population of every human world. And when it finally bloomed, the galaxy would learn that some lessons teach more than the teacher intended, but that was still in the future. For now, Catherine Cole sat in silence and began planning the evacuation of 18 million human souls from worlds they had built with their own hands. The assembly moved on to other business. Humanity's pain was not even worth remembering. 12 years passed since the day Catherine Cole lost the vote in the Galactic Assembly. 12 years of quiet humiliation, of watching other species take what they wanted from humanity while the assembly did nothing to help. 12 years of learning exactly how little the galaxy cared about human lives, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth. In a facility that officially did not exist, Admiral Christopher Hayes studied the holographic map floating before him. Red lines spread across the display like blood vessels, each one representing the expansion of the Crescent Collective into neutral space. The Crescent were monsters. There was no other word for them. They were a species that had built their entire civilization on conquest and consumption. When they found a weaker species, they did not trade with them or form alliances. They simply took everything and killed everyone who resisted. Dozens of species had been wiped out by the Crescent over the past 100,000 years. For a long time, the Galactic Assembly had kept the Crescent contained. Economic pressure, occasional military actions, and careful diplomacy had prevented them from expanding too far. But now the Assembly was distracted by internal politics and ancient territorial disputes. The Crescent were growing bolder by the month. "They have taken 3 more systems this year," reported Commander Linda Martinez from her station nearby. "They are not even trying to hide it anymore." The Assembly has filed formal protests, but the Crescent ignored them. Hayes nodded grimly. He was a tall man in his 60s, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death over his long military career. 20 years ago, he had commanded the defense of a small human colony when raiders attacked. He had watched good people die because humanity did not have the ships or weapons to protect them properly. That experience had changed him. It had taught him that in this galaxy, the only thing that truly mattered was strength. Everything else was just words. "What about our request for defensive assistance?" he asked. Martinez's face told him the answer before she spoke. Denied. High Arbiter Vazal ruled that human colonies in the Crescent expansion path do not qualify for assembly protection. He said, "We have not held those worlds long enough to establish protected status." How long is long enough? 10,000 years at minimum. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Humanity had only been traveling between stars for 300 years. By assembly standards, they would not qualify for protection until long after everyone currently alive had turned to dust. "There is more," Martinez continued. "The Velthari have proposed something called the Containment Protocol. They want to ban humanity from establishing any new colonies, opening any new trade routes, or building any new research stations. They say, we are expanding too fast and disrupting the natural order." "The natural order," Hayes repeated. "Meaning the order where they stay on top and we stay on the bottom?" "The vote is scheduled for next month. Current estimates say it will pass easily." Hayes turned away from the display and walked to the window. Outside, an artificial garden grew under simulated sunlight, a small piece of earth preserved deep underground. They had built this entire facility in secret, hidden from the sensors and spies that the assembly used to monitor humanity, because they had learned very early that the older species did not trust human military development, not because humanity was strong. They were not, at least not officially. The problem was that humanity grew too fast. In 300 years, humans had gone from primitive rockets that could barely reach their own moon to ships that crossed between stars in days. They had developed weapons and technology at a pace that made the older species nervous. Most civilizations took hundreds of thousands of years to achieve what humanity had accomplished in a few centuries. The Velthari called it unnatural. The Corinthax called it dangerous. Even species that were friendly to humanity watched them with wary eyes, wondering what these strange young beings might become if they were allowed to continue developing without limits. "What is our current military status?" Hayes asked. "The real status, not the official reports." Martinez glanced around the room, checking that no one else was listening. "The public fleet has 47 ships, all armed within assembly regulations. Light weapons, defensive systems only, nothing that could threaten a major power, and the rest. Project Prometheus is running ahead of schedule. The hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt have produced another 100 vessels this year. Total count is now over 400 combat-ready ships armed with weapons that officially do not exist." Hayes nodded slowly. For 60 years, since the very beginning of human space travel, some people had understood what the galaxy truly was. They had seen how the assembly treated younger species. They had watched humanity get pushed around and dismissed and exploited. And they had started building in secret, preparing for the day when patience and diplomacy were no longer enough to faces. That was the strategy. One face was public, cooperative, accepting every insult and injustice with quiet dignity. The other face was hidden, building ships and weapons and technology in places the assembly would never think to look. Hayes had dedicated his entire career to that hidden face. He had overseen the construction of secret bases on asteroids and moons throughout human space. He had directed research into weapons that broke the laws of physics as the assembly understood them. He had trained crews for ships that officially did not exist. All of it preparation for a day he hoped would never come. But a day he knew was getting closer. His communicator buzzed with an urgent message. He read it twice, feeling the color drain from his face with each word. "Commander, contact all senior officers. Emergency meeting, highest classification. Now." "What has happened?" Hayes handed her the communicator. The message was from Ambassador Cole, and it was only 2 sentences long. But those 2 sentences changed everything. The Dreschen hegemony had signed a secret agreement with the Crescent Collective. In exchange for safe passage through Dreschen space, the Cretan had agreed to target their expansion toward human territories first, the galaxy's oldest. Civilizations had decided that the youngest needed to be eliminated. Hayes stood in silence for a long moment, processing the implications. The Dreschen had always hated humanity for daring to colonize worlds they claimed. The Cretan had always been looking for easy targets to consume. Now they had found each other, united by their desire to see humanity destroyed. "How long before the Cretan reach our borders?" he asked at their current rate of expansion. 6 months? Maybe less? 6 months? Not enough time to build more ships. Not enough time to develop new weapons. Not enough time to do anything except watch and wait for the blow to fall. Unless humanity stopped waiting. Unless they stopped playing by rules that had never protected them. Unless they finally showed the galaxy what they had been building in the shadows all these years. Hayes looked at the map again. At the red lines spreading toward human space, he thought about the colonies that would burn if the Cretan reached them. He thought about the children, who would die because the assembly did not consider them worth protecting, and he made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Again, preparations for Operation Awakening, he said quietly. It is time for humanity to wake up. The order went out through hidden channels, 2 secret bases across human space. Ships began moving into position. Weapons were loaded, and crews were briefed. 60 years of preparation was about to be tested. The galaxy had tried to contain humanity. It had tried to limit their growth, deny their rights, and finally arrange their destruction. It had treated them like insects to be crushed. Under the boot of older and greater civilizations, it was about to learn that some insects have stings. The attack on New Geneva came. Without any warning at all, one moment. The colony's sensors showed empty space. Just stars and darkness stretching out forever. The next moment, 47 Cretan warships appeared out of nowhere. Their weapons already firing before the alarms could even begin to sound. New Geneva was a beautiful world. 8 million humans had built their lives there over the past 50 years. They had turned a rocky planet with thin air into a garden world with forests and lakes and cities that sparkled under an alien sun. Children went to schools there. Families celebrated holidays together. Old people sat on porches and watched sunsets that painted the sky in colors Earth had never known. The planetary defense grid was designed according to assembly regulations. Light weapons, defensive shields, nothing that could threaten any major power. It was supposed to hold off pirates and small raiding parties till help could arrive, against 47 Cretan warships. It lasted exactly 11 minutes. Ambassador Catherine Cole watched the footage in the Galactic Assembly Chamber, surrounded by 412 species who displayed various forms of polite disinterest. The images were burned into her mind, cities turning to fire and ash. Evacuation ships blown apart before they could escape the atmosphere. Millions of people dying in the span of 3 hours. 8 million human beings gone, erased from existence like they had never mattered at all. When the recording ended, Catherine stood in silence. She had been doing this job for 20 years now. She had learned to control her emotions, to speak calmly, even when she wanted to scream. But today, her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her documents. She waited for the response she knew would come. "Hi, Arbiter." Wazel's crystalline form pulsed with soft blue light as he spoke. "The Assembly acknowledges this tragedy and offers its deepest sympathies to the human delegation. However, as the Cretan Collective is not a member of this body, we have no authority over their actions. Furthermore, the colony of New Geneva was established in territory that was subject to ongoing disputes, and therefore did not qualify for Assembly protection under current regulations." Catherine heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. 8 million dead, and the response was sympathy and legal technicalities. 8 million people, she said. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Children burned alive in their schools. Families who had done nothing wrong, except try to build better lives for themselves, all of them gone. "The Assembly offers its most sincere condolences," Wazel repeated. Something broke inside Catherine Cole at that moment. Something that had been holding together through 20 years of insults and dismissals and injustice. Something that had believed, despite everything, that patience and diplomacy would eventually make things better. That belief died in the assembly chamber. Surrounded by beings who had watched her people burn and offered nothing but condolences, she stood straighter and took a deep breath. Her hands stopped shaking. A strange calm settled over her. The kind of calm that comes when you have finally made a decision you have been avoiding for a long time. "I have a message from Earth," she said. Her voice was different now, harder, colder. "From the United Human Government. Speaking with one voice for all our people everywhere in the galaxy." Activated her personal display, projecting words in the air for everyone to see. Then she began to read them aloud. "To the Galactic Assembly and all its member species, humanity has spent 40 years seeking acceptance within your institutions. We have followed your laws. We have respected your customs. We have submitted to your judgments even when those judgments cost us our homes, our livelihoods, and our dignity." The chamber was completely silent now. Every alien eye and sensor was focused on the small human woman standing at the central podium. "We have watched our colonies stripped away by species who had not visited them in 50,000 years. We have watched our people forced to become refugees because our claims were deemed too young to matter. We have watched our petitions ignored, our requests denied, our voices dismissed." Catherine paused and looked around the chamber. The Velthari who had proposed the containment protocol. The Corinthax who had ruled against humanity in every major case. The Dreshen who had conspired with the Crescent to arrange the destruction of human worlds. The hundreds of other species who had watched all of this happen and done nothing. "We have been patient. We have been reasonable. We have been everything you demanded us to be. And in return, you have given us nothing but contempt." She reached up and removed the small golden seal from her jacket. It was the symbol of humanity's membership in the Galactic Assembly, given to the first human ambassador 40 years ago. Catherine had worn it every day of her career. It had meant everything to her once. She placed it on the podium and stepped back. As of this moment, the United Human Government withdraws from the Galactic Assembly. "We reject your laws. We reject your customs. We reject your authority over our people and our worlds. We reclaim every colony you have taken from us. We reclaim our right to grow and expand as we see fit. We reclaim our future." The shock in the chamber was almost physical. In 400,000 years of Galactic Assembly history, no species had ever voluntarily withdrawn. The very idea was unthinkable. The Assembly was the foundation of galactic civilization. Leaving it was like stepping off the edge of the world. Catherine turned and began walking toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. Just before she reached the great doors, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "To those who have harmed us," she said. "To those who have dismissed us. To those who have looked at humanity and seen nothing but an insignificant young species to be used and discarded. We suggest you remember something." Her eyes found Sethrock, the Dreshen ambassador who had conspired with the Crescent. She held his gaze as she spoke her final words. "We are young. We are small. We have been in this galaxy for only a heartbeat compared to your ancient civilizations. But we are not insignificant, and we are done pretending to be." The great doors closed behind her with a sound that seemed to echo across every world in the galaxy. For a long moment, then, slowly, the murmuring began. Translation devices struggled to process the unprecedented nature of what had just occurred. Representatives turned to each other with expressions of confusion and disbelief. The Velthari delegation clicked urgently among themselves. The Corinthax pulsed with colors that had no translation in any human language. Even the Nethril, who usually cared about nothing, swirled in patterns of agitation. High Arbiter Vozel called for order, but no one was listening. The Assembly had maintained its power for 400,000 years because everyone accepted that there was no alternative. Membership might be frustrating, might be unfair, might favor the old over the young. But it was the only game in town. Now humanity had simply walked away. They had rejected the only system the galaxy had ever known. stepped into the unknown. Most species believed this was suicide. Without assembly protection, without trade agreements, without the legal frameworks that kept aggressive species in check, humanity would be destroyed within a decade. They were too young, too weak, too small to survive alone. But a few observers, the wiser ones, noticed something that made them uneasy. Catherine Cole had not looked afraid when she walked out those doors. She had not looked desperate or angry or reckless. She had looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, like someone who had been planning this moment for a very long time. Wazelle finally restored order and called for an emergency session to discuss the implications of humanity's withdrawal. Committees were formed. Analyses were ordered. The great machinery of galactic bureaucracy began to turn, but deep in their ancient minds, some of the oldest beings in the chamber felt something they had not experienced in thousands of years. They felt afraid. 3 months after humanity walked out of the Galactic Assembly, the Cretan Collective launched its largest attack in recorded history. 72 warships gathered at the edge of human space, carrying enough weapons to burn a dozen worlds down to bare rock. Their target was Haven's Rest, a colony of 2 million humans located on a green world orbiting a yellow star, much like Earth's sun. The colony was smaller than New Geneva had been, but its location made it valuable. Taking Haven's Rest would give the Cretan perfect base for further attacks into human territory. The Cretan commanders were confident. They had seen the footage from New Geneva. They knew that human defenses were weak, limited by assembly regulations to light weapons and basic shields. They expected this attack to be even easier than the last one. Some of the commanders were already dividing up the spoils, discussing which officers would get the best slaves and which would claim the most valuable territory. The humans would fight, of course. Every species fought when its worlds were threatened. But fighting and winning were very different things. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven's Rest system. Sensors swept the area, searching for any signs of resistance. They found exactly what they expected: a handful of small defense platforms orbiting the planet, a few patrol ships running on outdated engines, nothing that could challenge even a single Cretan warship. The lead commander, a scarred veteran named Crosath, gave the order to advance. His ships moved forward in standard attack formation, spreading out to encircle the planet and cut off any escape routes. This would be quick and brutal, just the way the Cretan liked it. They were halfway to the planet when the trap closed around them. Admiral Christopher Hayes watched the Cretan fleet approach from the bridge of the HMS Defiance. Around him, 300 human warships held position behind the system's largest moon, hidden from enemy sensors by technology that the Assembly had never known existed. "They are taking the bait," reported Captain Sarah Mitchell from the tactical station. "Moving into optimal range, exactly as predicted." What is the status of the colony? Evacuation completed 2 hours ago. Every civilian has been moved to safety. The cities are running on automated systems now. The Cretan will find empty buildings and fake life signs. Hayes nodded. They had known this attack was coming for months. Intelligence agents had intercepted Cretan communications and tracked their fleet movements. Every step of this battle had been planned and prepared for, but knowing an attack was coming and stopping were two very different things. Today would prove whether 60 years of secret preparation had been enough. "Signal the fleet," Hayes ordered. "Operation Awakening begins now." 300 ships emerged from behind the moon in perfect formation. They moved with a speed and coordination that should have been impossible for vessels their size. Their hulls were painted black, almost invisible against the darkness of space. Their weapons powered up with a hum that could be felt through the deck plates. On the Cretan flagship, alarm screamed as sensors suddenly detected the human fleet. Commander Crosath stared at his display in disbelief. Where had they come from? The intelligence reports said humanity had less than 50 combat ships in their entire navy. This had to be some kind of trick, some kind of illusion. Then the humans opened fire. Beams of pure white light lanced across the void, cutting through Cretan shields like they were made of paper. The first warship to be hit simply came apart, its hull torn open from bow to stern in less than 2 seconds. The second and third followed before anyone could even give orders to return fire. The Cressian tried to fight back. They were warriors, after all, veterans of 100 conquests. Their weapons blazed against the human ships, filling space with enough destructive energy to crack a small moon. The human shields held. Not perfectly, not without strain, but they held. And while the Cressian were firing everything they had, the human fleet was taking them apart piece by piece. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, 68 Cressian warships drifted as burning wreckage. The remaining 4, their engines destroyed and their weapon systems smashed, had surrendered rather than die. It was the first time in Cressian history that any of their ships had ever surrendered to anyone. Human losses were 0. Not a single ship destroyed. Not a single crew member killed. Admiral Hayes transmitted a message on all frequencies, knowing it would be picked up by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. To the Cressian Collective, your attack on human territory has failed. Your fleet has been destroyed. We have captured 4 of your vessels and their crews. We will treat them according to the rules of war that your species has never followed, because we are not like you. He paused, letting the words sink in across 1,000 listening worlds. We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire to expand into your space or destroy your civilization. But any further attacks against human worlds will be met with overwhelming force. This is not a threat. This is a promise. And unlike the promises of the Galactic Assembly, our promises mean something. The message spread at the speed of light, carrying with it recordings of the battle that showed exactly what had happened. The galaxy watched in shock as the footage played on every news channel and information network. The youngest species in known space had just destroyed a Cressian battle fleet without taking a single casualty in the Galactic Assembly. Panic erupted. The Velthri demanded to know how humanity had built such weapons. Their intelligence services had monitored human space for decades and seen nothing. The Corinthax ordered immediate investigations into how their sensors had been fooled. The Dressian, suddenly very aware that their conspiracy with the Cressian had been exposed, began looking for somewhere to hide. Over the following days, the truth slowly emerged. For 60 years, humanity had been building in secret. While their public face accepted every insult and followed every rule, their hidden face had been constructing a military infrastructure that rivaled the greatest powers in the galaxy. Secret bases in asteroid belts, hidden shipyards in remote systems, research facilities buried deep underground where scientists developed weapons that broke the laws of physics as the Assembly understood them. They had done all of this while appearing weak and compliant, while accepting humiliation after humiliation, while playing the role of the insignificant young species that posed no threat to anyone, and the older civilizations had believed it. They had looked at humanity and seen exactly what they expected to see. Another young species to be controlled and exploited. They had never imagined that the humans might be playing a longer game, might be planning for a future that extended beyond the next century. Now the mask was off. Now, the galaxy could see what humanity had truly become while everyone was looking the other way. Hari, Arbiter Vizel, called an emergency session of the Assembly to discuss the implications of this revelation. He spoke of the need for calm, for careful analysis, for measured response, but his crystalline form flickered with colors that told a different story. Colors that any Corinthax would recognize immediately. Fear, deep, ancient, bone-chilling fear. Because the Corinthax remembered something that younger species had forgotten. They remembered the last time a young civilization had risen too fast, had developed too quickly, had refused to accept its place in the galactic order. That civilization had nearly destroyed the galaxy before. It was finally stopped. The war had lasted 10,000 years and killed. Trillions of beings in humanity had grown, stronger in 3 centuries than that ancient species had in 10,000 years. What would they become if given another century? Another millennium? What heights would they reach? What powers would they develop? What threat would they pose to everything the Assembly had built over 400,000 years? For the first time in living memory, the oldest beings in the galaxy looked at the youngest and saw something that terrified them. They saw their own obsolescence staring back at them. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Haven's Rest, and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Crescent Collective, once the terror of 100 worlds, had retreated to its core systems and begged for peace. Human counterattacks had destroyed their shipyards, their weapons factories, their ability to wage war. For the first time in their brutal history, the Crescent faced an enemy they could not defeat, could not intimidate, could not even slow down. The terms of surrender were simple: release every slave they had taken over the past 1,000 years, pay reparations to every species they had wronged, and never expand beyond their current borders again. The Crescent agreed to everything. They had no choice. The Dreschen hegemony. The ancient species that had conspired with the Crescent to destroy humanity found themselves in an even worse position. Their secret alliance had been exposed for all the galaxy to see. They had plotted genocide against a fellow assembly member, and now that member had proven stronger than anyone had imagined. The Dreschen ambassador who had once looked at humanity with such contempt. Sethrak had disappeared shortly after the truth came out. Some said he had fled to the far reaches of the galaxy. Others said he had been quietly executed by his own government to prevent further embarrassment. No one knew for certain, and few cared. In the great chamber of the Galactic Assembly, things had changed even more dramatically. The seats were still arranged in their ancient pattern. The dome still showed the positions of every inhabited world. But the balance of power had shifted completely. Ambassador Catherine Cole stood at the central podium once again. But this time, the faces looking down at her showed something very different from the contempt she had endured for 20 years. Now she saw fear, respect, and desperate calculation mixing together in 412 different ways. "Humanity does not seek to replace the Assembly," she said, her voice calm and steady. "We have no desire to rule the galaxy or force our will upon other species. We have shown our strength not out of aggression, but out of necessity. We were attacked, and we defended ourselves. We were denied justice, and we took it back." She paused, letting her words settle across the vast chamber. "But we also remember everything that was done to us. We remember being told our colonies did not matter. We remember being told our people's lives were worth less than ancient territorial claims that no one had enforced in 50,000 years. We remember being told we were too young, too small, too insignificant to deserve fair treatment." High Arbiter Vizal's crystalline form flickered with uncertain colors. He had ruled the Assembly for longer than most species had existed. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, had watched empires crumble into dust. But he had never seen anything like what was happening now. "Ambassador Cole," he said, choosing his words carefully, "the Assembly is prepared to discuss terms for humanity's return to membership. We acknowledge that past decisions may have been ... imperfect. We are willing to revisit territorial claims, to reconsider voting rights, to make changes that reflect humanity's new ... status." Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The Assembly misunderstands our position, High Arbiter. We are not here to ask for readmission. We are here to offer terms of our own." She activated her holographic display, showing a map of the galaxy with humanity's current territory marked in blue. What had been a small cluster of systems a year ago had grown dramatically. Not through conquest, but through alliance. Dozens of smaller species, long oppressed by the Assembly's larger members, had asked to join humanity's new coalition. "We call it the Terran Alliance," Catherine explained. "It is a new kind of interstellar organization based on principles that the Assembly forgot long ago. Equal representation for all members, regardless of how old they are. Protection for everyone, regardless of how small they are. Justice that cannot be bought by those with longer histories or larger fleets." The chamber erupted in shouts and protests. This was unprecedented. This was chaos. This was the destruction of everything the Assembly had built over 400,000 years. Representatives shouted at each other, at Catherine, at the High Arbiter. Translation devices struggled to keep up with the dozens of languages. Being spoken at once, Catherine waited patiently for the noise to die down. She had expected this reaction. She had planned for it. "The choice before you was simple," she said, when the chamber finally grew quiet enough for her to be heard. "The Terran Alliance will continue to grow with or without this assembly's approval. More species will join us because we offer them something you never did, a chance to be heard, to matter, to have their rights respected." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives she had dealt with for 2 decades, the Velthri, who had proposed the containment protocol, the Corinthax, who had dismissed every human petition, the hundreds of species who had watched humanity suffer and done nothing. "You can choose to adapt," she continued. "You can reform your own institutions. You can become partners in building a better galaxy. Or you can choose to oppose us and discover just how much humanity has learned about strength over the past 60 years. She began walking toward the exit just as she had 1 year ago, when she had withdrawn from the assembly. But this time, there was no shock or disbelief in the chamber. There was only the heavy silence of beings who were watching history change before their eyes. At the door, Catherine stopped and turned back one final time. "He spent 40 years teaching us that the galaxy only respects power, that justice is a luxury for the strong, and the weak must simply endure whatever the strong decide to give them. We were good students, High Arbiter. We learned your lessons very well." The doors closed behind her, and she did not look back. In the decades that followed, the Terran Alliance grew to include nearly 1/3 of all known space. Species that had been ignored and exploited for thousands of years found protection and partnership. Among humanity's growing coalition, trade flourished. Technology advanced. Wars became rare because the Alliance was strong enough to stop them before they started. The Galactic Assembly did not disappear, but it changed. Faced with a competing organization that offered better terms to smaller species, the Assembly was forced to reform or watch its membership shrink. Voting rights were restructured. Ancient privileges were eliminated. The contempt that older species had always shown toward younger ones slowly gave way to something closer to respect. Not because the older species had changed their hearts. Most of them still believed they were superior, still looked down on humanity and its young allies. But they had learned that beliefs mattered less than facts, and the facts were simple. Humanity had been underestimated. Humanity had been dismissed. Humanity had been pushed to the breaking point and told they did not matter. And humanity had proven everyone wrong. Ambassador Catherine Cole retired eventually, after serving longer than any human representative before her. She spent her final years on Earth in a small house by the ocean, watching sunsets that reminded her of all the worlds humanity had saved. Sometimes reporters would visit her, asking about the old days, about the moments she had walked out of the assembly, about the feeling of watching 8 million people die and knowing no one cared. She would tell them the truth, that she had never planned to change the galaxy. She had only wanted justice for her people. Everything that came after was simply the result of refusing to accept anything less. And when they asked what advice she would give to other young species, just beginning their journey among the stars, she would smile and give them the same answer every time. "Be patient," she would say. "Work hard. Learn everything you can. Build in secret if you have to. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you do not matter. Because someday, the universe will give you a chance to show what you are truly made of. And when that day comes, you need to be ready." Humanity had been ready, and the galaxy would never be the same.